wanted to talk about a revolver and how they operate and some proper etiquette behind them. First, I'm going to show the gun is loaded. I'll unload it now. How a double action revolver works is like this. You pull the trigger. Simple as that. And what's happening, even though it's called a double action revolver, it's actually completing three actions. You're pulling the trigger, it's beginning to cock the hammer, it's rotating the cylinder to the next shot, and on the back of the trigger pull, it's also then dropping the hammer. So really it's triple action, not double action. For all intents and purposes, a double action revolver is semi-automatic. Technically speaking, no, it's not, because you are manually creating each of those actions. But you fire as fast as you pull the trigger. Now, one thing about revolvers, whenever I show somebody a revolver that doesn't really know much about them, the very first thing they always focus on is that hammer. I don't know why that becomes the focal point. They're like, you have to cock that hammer each time you shoot it? It's the same question I get from people I show this revolver to, or any double action revolver to over the years. And it's like, no, you don't. And a double action revolver was not designed to cock the hammer. Now, you can cock the hammer on a double action revolver. Make a single action. It cocks the hammer back to ready fire position. It puts the trigger back to a hair trigger. At that point, it reduces the trigger pull by about a third. So instead of 12 pounds or something, it's like 3 pounds, 4 pounds. I don't know the exact numbers. Makes it much more accurate for a single shot. Anyways, one thing about revolvers that's cool is that the rule of thumb is once you've learned one, you have learned them all. And semi-automatic pistols come in all types of varieties, with hammers exposed, not exposed, safeties, not safeties, striker fire, hammer fire. Just the list goes on and on. But with a revolver, 95% of them are like this. There's some sort of button next to the cylinder on the left side. You push it, it opens it up. And you load it, close it back up. I want to get into etiquette a little bit with revolvers. You want to handle them very carefully. If you compare a revolver to a semi-automatic pistol, semi-automatic pistols, although they might be more complicated to operate, they're actually simpler in design. They're simpler and they're more rugged. And that's why the military uses semi-automatic pistols, and that's now why the police uses them. You could take a semi-automatic pistol and you could just throw it over a hill. You could smack it up against a tree, whatever. It's still going to fire. Revolvers, on the other hand, even though they're typically more often made out of stronger materials like steel, and even though they're simpler to operate, they are actually more sensitive to dirt, damage, stuff like that. It's like a Swiss watch. You got to treat it really carefully. Now, open a double action revolver. Typically, there's a button on the side here. You push it in, or you pull it, or you push it in, something like that. And then you, from the other side, push open the cylinder. And to load it, you just drop your ammo. But to close it, what you want to do is you want to put most of the pressure here on this crane hinge when you close it. You can also put some pressure on the side of the cylinder and you close it. You close it carefully and then index it, which means if it's not locked up, twist the cylinder until it locks. So very carefully and index it. You never want to do one of those things where you flip it. Some revolvers will handle that better than others. but for the most part, it's something you don't want to do. When I eject my spent brass, I typically like to do it just carefully. I know that you see people pull them out and just bam. I don't know if that's good or bad for the gun, but to me it seems like doing that enough would not be good. Unless you're in some competition or a self-defense situation, I can't see how extracting them like that is going to be a good idea. But the proper way to load a double action revolver is once it's opened up, you want to get your hand, basically something like this, where you're holding the cylinder still, and you rotate it with your thumb. You just drop your rounds in it, rotate it, and this is when you're on the range, not when you're loading a speed loader or something. And that way you always have the hole away from the frame of the gun. You don't want to just be putting them in different positions. You don't want to be doing this and then going around this way and then getting close to the frame of the gun and having to do it like that. It makes it difficult, and you're going to scratch up your gun out over the years. You always want to kind of load it in one position, right there. See, I'm rotating it. I'm putting it in the same spot every time to load it. And carefully close. Even pressure on the cylinder and crane. Now, one of the biggest points to these double action revolvers that I want to point out is you see people shooting them a lot in single action, and that's fine, although they're not designed to be fired that way. Now, these were turn of the 20th century inventions, and at the time it was a wonderful thing to go from a cowboy action revolver that you had to cock every shot. It's very similar to this, to having something double action. Double action was amazing, and that's really how these are meant to be fired. Double action, you get rapid fire, But one thing that's driving me nuts is you see people that they don't know much about revolvers or how they operate. They'll cock the hammer, they don't take a shot, and then they'll leave their finger fully pulled to the rear as they drop that hammer down slowly. And they're dropping it on the back of a live round of ammunition. And that's a terrible thing to do because you could potentially set it off. What you have in a revolver is a transfer bar. It's a little leaf of metal that fills the void between this hammer void and the firing pin. And that transfer bar does not fill that void unless that trigger is fully pulled to the rear. So when people are letting the hammer down, fully pulled to the rear, they're leaving the transfer bar up. They're pushing the firing pin right into the back of the round. What you want to do is tap the hammer. Ideally, get your finger off the trigger, because as that trigger's going forward, as the hammer's dropping, it's pulling down the transfer bar. You can't accidentally set it off. The best way to do that, though, is put your thumb in it and then do it. Get your finger completely off the trigger. See, as I'm bringing the hammer down, the trigger's going back forward. The trigger's not fully pulled to the rear. It can't engage that transfer bar, therefore it can't accidentally set a round off. That's what makes them safe to carry. One more thing about double action revolver. This is kind of going out on a limb here. Typically, any semi-automatic pistol, you pretty much never hold it with your finger on the trigger. It's something like this. But on a double action revolver, the trigger is so stiff, you're talking usually like 12 pounds, that it's not really a horrible thing to get your hand on the gun and your finger in the trigger guard before you're ready to shoot on a double action revolver. You look at how much force it actually takes to pull that trigger. It's huge. And the trigger doesn't just, flop around. Look at that. I don't even think I could pull it like that if I tried. That's stiff. You have to have the joint of your finger on that trigger and really be deliberate about pulling that trigger. As where a semi-automatic pistol, it's closer to something like this. It's closer to the trigger pull of a cocked revolver, which just by putting the weight of the revolver down, it could set that off. Just putting the weight of the revolver on my finger. If I dropped it, it could go off. That's where, it could never happen. The gun would have to be a 15-pound gun. It would have to be, 10 times heavier than what it is. So, pulling it out, finger on the trigger, on a double action revolver, not that big of a problem, not that big a safety issue. And it's something I do sometimes, and I'm kind of training with it, just pulling it out to get it in there. Because you want your finger on that trigger if you're going to pull it. Now, a semi-automatic pistol, totally different. I'm going to pull it out, my finger's going to be right there always, because I know how light those triggers are. It's never going to be on that trigger. But when I pull the revolver, a little bit different. I'll let it slip sometimes, get it in there. I'm pulling it up. I don't worry about it. One last thing. It drives me insane to no end when somebody calls a revolver a pistol. Now, at one point, pretty much any handgun was considered a pistol. Back in the 1800s, you had the single action army revolvers, and they called them pistols. But after the invention of semi-automatic pistols, they differentiated between the two by calling this a revolver and the semi-automatic a pistol. Now I know a single action pistol is still a pistol. A single action pistol, not single action, but a single shot. A single shot handgun is still considered a pistol. A semi-automatic is considered a pistol. In today's terms, this is not a pistol. Except, in my jurisdiction, in law, this is considered a pistol. But technical terms, this is not a pistol. It's a revolver. You say the word pistol, you think semi-automatic, or you can think Derringer, or you can think something along those lines. You say revolver for any type of wheel gun. That's a revolver. That's how it is. It's not a pistol in today's terms. So, anyways, that's just some of my thoughts on revolvers and what I think about them. And they're still just a great weapon in today's world. They're not really outdated. I like 5 for sure, 6 for sure. And you got some speed loaders. I carry 15 rounds on me. And reloading with speed loaders is not that hard. Especially if you practice it and you have the right ammunition. I know sometimes these little critical defense with the rubber tips, they want to kind of stick when you're trying to drop them in off speed loaders. So that's a little bit of a concern, but for the most part, loading a speed loader into it, as long as you're focused, you do it rather quickly. If you want to learn more about revolvers and see how good they can be, look up Jerry Michalik on YouTube. He's an amazing revolver shooter, and great weapons. So, anyways, that's my thoughts on them. So, thanks for watching.